Boudoir Photography. Today I'm going to walk you through step by step of how I would edit one of my photos without any presets. So first thing I will do, we'll close my trusty user presets that I made and we'll get right into it. So this is the raw photo just as shot. As you can see, no changes have been made whatsoever. This was as it was shot, so we'll just leave everything right there for now. This is a little bit bright and a little bit cool for my liking. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull this temperature up just a little bit to warm her up and the background. I'm going to come down to my exposure and bump that down. And the main thing I'm looking for in this photo is the musculature in her back and the softness in her hair. And I think that those are the two things that really pull this in and draw you in as a viewer to this photo. So I'm going to do my best to maintain the softness of her hair and maintain the musculature in her back. Those are going to be the main focal points for me. So as I bring this exposure down, I'll probably play with it quite a bit throughout the editing process, but I do want to continue to see the detail in here and especially in here. So I'm going to bring the contrast. I'm going to play with it. I think I'm going to pull it up just a little bit to really define the muscles in her back. So maybe we'll start there. My highlights are pretty high. I did overexpose right here because I didn't want the detail from the window. So I'm going to pull this down quite a bit, probably to about right there. Another thing I'm looking for within the highlights are the shadows and the highlights of the muscles in her back. So speaking of shadows, I'm going to pull these up just a little bit, and with that we can take the exposure down a little bit more. It's kind of like a game of give and take. The whites, I am going to play with these a little bit too. I think I'm going to keep them right about there. And my blacks, I'm going to bring these down a little bit. I'm going for more of a sultry look, so we will see how that changes as we go. Texture, I'm going to bump up the texture just a little bit because I do want to capture the texture in her hair. And I'll pull up the clarity. And I love the dehaze tool. I'm definitely pulling this up. I just feel like this makes everything more soft, and you can almost just feel how the hair is falling on her shoulders and feel that on yourself. So that I love. I'm going to pull up the vibrance a little bit so that the color of her hair and the color of her skin kind of pops, but I am going to pull down the saturation just so she's not super orange. And I'm noticing that the blue is pulling in kind of cooler tones over here. So as we go through, I might pull this down just a little bit more. We're going to mess with the tone curve in a second. As we pull the blues, I'm going to darken them and then pull them down a little bit. And as we do that, you can kind of see this area start to warm up just a little bit. Maybe let's pull this up, pull that down. I don't mind it pulling red, but I don't want it to pull too red, especially in here. Just trying to watch the tones of her skin over here as well. So let's see if we can take that down just a little bit, kind of neutralize it. And with that, we'll kind of do the same with the pinks. Just pull the pinks down. Maybe these up a little bit. Sorry if I'm mumbling. This is my first video that I'm ever doing, so bear with me just a little bit. I'm going to pull the noise reduction up a little bit just to kind of soften out her skin in the front and the back. I kind of play with my profile correction. Sometimes I like to leave it on depending on how dark I want the photo. In this case, I'm going to leave it off. I just think the darker edges kind of bring a little bit more to it, and I do want it to be a darker style edit. So as we come back up here, I'm going to get into the tone curve now. So I'm going to make my dots here, here, and there. And if you've never played with the tone curve before, it's an awesome tool, and you can kind of just make everything your own in this way. You have a lot of control over here. So I'm going to pull this down. This is going to pull our shadows a little bit deeper. And I do like that. I'm going to pull my blacks. There we go. I'm going to pull this up just a little bit so we're not going super dark. This is your mids. You can brighten or darken. We're just going to darken these a little bit. I am being cautious of the shadows here. I don't want them to look flat, so that's where I'm going to pull this just a little bit more. And our highlights up here, we can make them super bright or almost gone. But be cautious of the highlights here on her body, so I'm going to keep that. I'm just going to bring it up just a tad. Okay, looking at this, I'm going to bring my blacks up a little bit. Pull up my contrast. Bump up the dehaze again. She's starting to look a little more orange than I'd like her to, so we're going to take this back down a little bit and brighten up through here. Good. I personally think it's okay if skin looks a little bit unnatural one way or the other in these photos. I think boudoir to me is much more about how you envision like their skin to feel, or the way their hands are touching, or the way that the hair is falling on your shoulders. It's much more visceral to me than just a pretty photo. So sometimes it's okay to take it a little bit too far. Like if we went a little bit too dark, then this is really popping out. Your eye is just taken here instantly, and that's fine. That might be some people's style. It might not be your client's style. So really just talk to your client and figure out what they prefer and what their style choice would be. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle usually. I do like it a little bit on the darker side sometimes. I love this right now because it's just making her waist look super tiny, which it already is. She's a beautiful girl. So you can see the curvature in her spine, and that's exaggerated with the highlights here and the shadow. This pulling in, the highlight up here, it just kind of rounds everything out, and it gives her this really great hourglass shape. She already had one, but it's kind of just accentuating it. So I think I might just leave it right there. I will brighten up my blacks just a little bit. And then once in a while I'll go through with the skin soften tool just to even out any lines, but she doesn't really have anything too bad here, anything at all actually. I will soften some of this out. You can always undo it, or you can always bump up your texture and kind of counteract it a little bit, which I kind of like that right there. I'm pretty pleased with this. I might play around with my mids one more time. I think I'm going to bring them up just a tad. Give her a little bit of life there, just so it's not so dark. But my goal of the photo was to accentuate the muscles in her back and keep the softness in her hair, and I think I've done that pretty well. Her skin looks soft, it looks warm, the tones are somewhat warm, and I'm pretty pleased with that. So I think that is that, you guys. That's the first edit. The second edit I'm going to do, here's the raw photo. We're going to go into black and white for this one. So the first thing we'll do is pop black and white. And when I'm looking at this photo, my eye is immediately drawn straight through here. And I think the contrast of the highlight here and the black of the one piece, my eye is also kind of drawn right here to this area, which would be the goal of boudoir. So in my opinion anyway, you might disagree, but that's fine. Agree to disagree, as we say. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is come right up to my dehaze, and I'm going to pull this up quite a bit. I'm going to pull my blacks down, and I'm also going to pull my whites down just to kind of soften it, because I don't want it to be like too cold, if that makes any sense at all. Probably not, but that's okay. I'm going to come down to my exposure, contrast. Let's pull this up. I think pulling up the contrast is really going to make this pop out of the photo. my clarity, once you turn the clarity up, you can see that this also really makes this pop, which I love. Again, my eye is almost immediately drawn to this section right here, which would be the goal of the photo. So I'm pretty pleased with that so far. This was actually not such a hard edit to do. So let's pull the texture up a little bit. You can feel the texture of, or see the texture of the bedspread and almost know what that would feel like. I'm going to come down. We don't have really many colors in this photo. This is a white bedspread, a black one piece, and this is a dark blue. So really, if we were to change anything here through the coloring, I'm kind of happy with how it looks, to be honest. So I'm just going to reset that back to 0. Sharpening was pulled up already. Let's try the profile correction. Usually I like to leave this off, but we'll just see what it looks like. I do like it off. Just makes everything a little bit more darker and sexy. So we'll leave that right where it is. I'm going to come down to my tone curve and we'll make our little dots on the line. I'm going to pull this down. It's going to really deepen my shadows and really draw your eye right to this section. The mids, we'll pull those up. I kind of just like to play with it, to be honest, until I get it where I like it. I don't want to pull this up too high because then I think it will attract too much light to under her arms. I do like the highlight under her jawline. However, I think the highlight is really hitting this part of the bed, so the more I come up with that, the more your eye is attracted to that section, and I don't want it to pull over here. I want the main attraction to be her body. So I'm going to pull this back down. And then once again, this is more the focal point. Let's try a little bit up with the highlights. Usually with the S curve, it will be opposite. So if you're pulling this down up here, usually this will come up a little bit, or vice versa. You definitely don't have to do that, but it's typically just the way that it's done. You could pull this black up a little bit if you don't want it to be that dark, but the more that you pull this up, it flattens the photo. It's a little more vintage. It's kind of just your personal style. I actually don't mind it, to be honest, up a little bit. It definitely gives it that vintage tone, which is, I think, really cool. It's, again, all about your client's preference and how you like to edit your photos. So I am going to leave that up there, I think, but I'm going to pull the blacks down a little bit. I just think now my eye is immediately drawn right here. Let's pull, and leave that right there. I do see that the photo feels kind of flat now, and you can't see the definition of her bottom, but if we look at the original photo, this black and white, I do feel like this is a lot more sensual than this photo here. So I'm pretty happy with this, to be honest. I love how the shadow and the highlights are picking up on all these little indents in her hips. I just think that that's what makes the photo interesting, and that's what makes it sexy. So I'm actually really happy with this. I might pull my highlights down a little bit here. And I'm pretty happy with this, you guys.